I pulled into the driveway of my own home, the house I'd lived in for 43 years, and felt something wrong before I even turned off the engine. The front door stood slightly ajar, and through the living room window I could see empty spaces where my furniture should have been. My heart hammered against my ribs as I grabbed my purse and walked inside. The living room looked stripped bare. My grandmother's cherry wood side tables were gone. The upholstered armchair where I'd nursed my son and read 1,000 books had vanished. Even the oriental rug my late husband Robert and I bought on our 25th anniversary in Istanbul was missing. I stood there at 72 years old, feeling like an intruder in my own home, and heard footsteps coming down the stairs. If you're watching this from anywhere in the country, subscribe and drop your state in the comments, because what happened next changed everything. My daughter-in-law Ashley appeared at the bottom of the staircase, her blonde ponytail swinging, not a trace of guilt on her 31-year-old face. She was 7 months pregnant and carrying a paint roller covered in pale yellow. "Oh, you're home early," she said, as casual as if she'd just borrowed a cup of sugar instead of dismantling my life. I looked past her up the stairs, where I could see the door to the guest room standing open and more of my belongings stacked in the hallway. My voice came out calmer than I felt. "Ashley, where is my furniture?" She set down the paint roller on a sheet of newspaper and wiped her hands on her already stained maternity jeans. "We moved it to the garage. We need space for the baby." The way she said it made it sound so reasonable, so obvious, like any rational person would understand. I walked through the dining room toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw the full extent of what she'd done. The mahogany dining table that seated 8, the one where we'd hosted every Thanksgiving for 3 decades, was gone. The china cabinet that held my mother's wedding dishes had been emptied and pushed against the wall. Through the kitchen window, I could see into the open garage, and my stomach dropped. Everything was there, piled haphazardly like trash waiting for bulk pickup day. My furniture sat exposed to the concrete floor's dampness, the February cold seeping into wood that had been carefully maintained for generations. I turned back to Ashley, who'd followed me into the kitchen. "You moved everything without asking me?" She crossed her arms over her belly. "Marcus said it would be fine. We're converting the guest room into a nursery." My son Marcus appeared in the doorway then, home early from his accounting firm, still wearing his dress shirt and tie. He looked between us, and I saw him calculate the situation, watched him decide which side to take. "Mom, we were going to talk to you about this tonight," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was 34 years old, and in that moment I saw how much he'd changed since marrying Ashley 2 years ago. The boy who once defended me against his father's grumpiness now couldn't meet my eyes. I kept my voice level. "Talk to me about moving my furniture out of my house?" Ashley stepped forward. "It's not just your house anymore, Margaret. Marcus and I live here too. We pay rent." That word, rent, hung in the air like a slap. They paid me $400 a month, a fraction of market value, and had since moving in 18 months ago. I could have exploded right there in my kitchen, with its yellow walls and the herb garden on the windowsill I'd maintained since 1987. I could have reminded them that I'd opened my home when they couldn't afford their own place after the wedding, that I'd been patient when $400 became $300 became, "We'll catch up next month." I could have pointed out that the furniture they'd shoved into my garage was worth more than everything they owned combined. But 43 years in this house had taught me something about power and patience. My late husband Robert used to say that the person who stays calm wins the argument, and he'd been right about that, like he'd been right about so many things. So I did something that clearly surprised both of them. I smiled. "I see," I said quietly, and walked past them toward the stairs, leaving them standing in the kitchen looking confused, and maybe just a little worried about what would happen next. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling my knees protest each step in that familiar way they had since my 72nd birthday last October. The hallway upstairs looked like a storage unit had exploded. My reading lamp lay on its side, the shade dented. Boxes of my winter clothes blocked the bathroom door. The guest room door stood wide open, and I could see they'd already painted 2 walls that nursery yellow. My sewing machine sat in the hallway, uncovered, with fabric scraps scattered around it. I stepped over a box labeled Margaret's Books in Ashley's loopy handwriting and went into my bedroom, the only space that still looked like mine. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed I'd shared with Robert for 38 years before cancer took him in 2019. and I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. But I didn't cry. I'd cried enough when Robert died, when I realized I'd be navigating the rest of my life without my partner, my best friend, the man who'd known me since I was 29. Instead, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out the leather folder I kept there. Inside was the deed to this house, purchased in 1982 for $67,000 and now worth close to $800,000 according to the last assessment. My name appeared on that deed, mine alone. Robert and I had bought it together, but when we refinanced in 1995, we'd put it solely in my name for estate planning reasons. I'd let Marcus and Ashley move in as a favor, a temporary solution while they got on their feet. There'd never been a lease, never anything in writing, just a mother helping her only child. That was about to change, and they had no idea what was coming. I heard them downstairs, their voices low and tense, probably arguing about how I'd reacted. Ashley's voice rose sharply. She's being completely unreasonable. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. My finger hovered over my sister Linda's name for a moment, but this wasn't a situation where I needed comfort or advice. I needed action. I scrolled to a different name, James Chen, the attorney who'd handled Robert's estate and had been our family lawyer since 2001. I sent him a text message. Need to discuss residential tenancy matter urgently. Can you see me tomorrow morning? His response came back within 2 minutes. 9 a.m. Bring any relevant documentation. I set the phone down and looked around my bedroom, at the photos on the dresser showing Marcus at every age, at my wedding photo, at the watercolor of the Golden Gate Bridge that Robert had bought me on our California trip. Tonight, I would start documenting everything. The next morning, I was sitting in James Chen's office by 8:55, 15 minutes before our scheduled appointment. I'd brought the deed, bank statements showing the sporadic rent payments, and photos I'd taken the previous night of my furniture stacked in the garage. James looked over everything with the careful attention that had made him one of the most respected estate attorneys in the county. He was 63, with silver hair and reading glasses that he kept adjusting as he reviewed my documents. "Margaret, I'm going to be direct with you," he said, setting down the photos. "Since there's no written lease agreement, and they're not paying fair market rent consistently, they're essentially tenants at will. You have significant legal options here." I leaned forward in my chair. "Tell me everything I can do." He pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing notes as he talked. James explained that I could issue a formal notice to quit, giving them 30 days to vacate the property. Since they'd been there longer than a year, I'd need to provide proper written notice and follow all state requirements for terminating a tenancy. "However," he said, looking at me over his glasses, "there's another approach that might resolve this more amicably. You could draft a formal lease agreement with clear terms about shared spaces, furniture, modifications to the home, and payment schedules. If they violate the lease, you'd have grounds for eviction." I thought about this. Part of me wanted them out immediately, wanted to reclaim my space and my peace. But another part, the mother part that couldn't quite shut off, worried about my pregnant daughter-in-law living in some cramped apartment, worried about Marcus's resentment lasting for years. "What would you recommend?" I asked. James set down his pen and gave me a look that was both professional and kind. "I'd recommend documenting everything first," James said, tapping the photos. "Take more pictures. Make a detailed inventory of your furniture and its condition. Screenshot those text messages about rent being late. Create a paper trail. Then decide whether you want them to stay under strict conditions or whether you want them out entirely." He pulled out a business card from his desk drawer. "This is Karen Rodriguez. She's a property appraiser and can give you a formal valuation of your furniture, especially those antique pieces. You'll want that documentation regardless of which direction you choose." I took the card, feeling the embossed lettering under my thumb. "How much time do I have to decide?" James leaned back in his chair. "The longer you wait, the more it looks like you're accepting the current arrangement. I'd say you have maybe a week before your legal position starts getting complicated. But Margaret?" He waited until I met his eyes. "Whatever you decide, make sure it's what you want, not what you think you should want. You've earned the right to prioritize your own peace." I left James's office at 10:15 with a manila folder full of documents and a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The morning was cold but sunny. the kind of February day that promised spring wasn't far off. I sat in my car in the parking lot and called Karen Rodriguez, the appraiser. She answered on the second ring, and when I explained my situation in general terms, offered to come by that afternoon at 3. "I'll need access to all the pieces," she said, "including anything that's been moved or stored." I assured her that wouldn't be a problem and hung up. Then I drove to the hardware store on Maple Street and bought the best padlock they had, a Master Lock model number 141D that cost $34.99. The clerk asked if I needed keys cut. I said no. The 2 keys that came with it would be plenty. One for me, one for my lawyer. When I got home, both cars were gone. Marcus would be at work until 6, and Ashley had mentioned yesterday that she had a doctor's appointment this morning. The house was mine for at least a few hours. I unlocked the side door to the garage and stepped into the chaos they'd created. My furniture sat in awkward piles, some pieces stacked on top of others in ways that made me wince. The cherry wood side tables were supporting a box of Ashley's decorative throw pillows. My grandmother's secretary desk, the one with the hidden compartments where she'd kept love letters from my grandfather during World War II, was shoved against the far wall with paint cans sitting on its leather writing surface. I started taking photos with my phone, making sure to capture every angle, every piece, every careless placement. The photos filled my camera roll, 63 pictures in total, each one time-stamped and geotagged. Then I began the work of rearranging. I wasn't trying to move everything back inside yet. That would come later, after I'd made my decision about what happened next. Instead, I created organization out of chaos. I cleared a space in the center of the garage and began grouping items logically. Dining room furniture together, bedroom pieces in another section, the smaller decorative items carefully arranged on a clear shelf. My back ached after an hour, and I had to stop twice to catch my breath and rest. I wasn't 30 anymore, wasn't even 50, and my body made sure I remembered that fact. But the physical work felt good, felt like taking action instead of just accepting what had been done to me. By the time I heard a car in the driveway at 2:30, I'd organized everything and taken another 40 pictures of the improved arrangement. I installed the padlock on the garage's side door just as Ashley's sedan pulled up. She got out of her car slowly, one hand supporting her lower back in that universal pregnancy gesture. For just a moment, seeing her struggle with the weight she carried, I felt a pang of sympathy. I'd been pregnant once, too, had experienced that peculiar combination of joy and discomfort that came with growing a new life. But then I remembered my furniture in the cold garage, remembered the dismissive way she'd said, "It's not just your house," and my resolve hardened. She walked past me toward the front door, barely glancing my way. "How was your appointment?" I asked pleasantly. "Fine," she said. "Everything's measuring on track." She paused with her hand on the doorknob. "Are you going to move your stuff back inside today? Marcus mentioned you seemed upset last night." I smiled that same calm smile from yesterday. "We'll see," I said, and followed her into the house, the new padlock key heavy in my pocket. Karen Rodriguez arrived at exactly 3 o'clock, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of sensible shoes that suggested she spent a lot of time on her feet. She was about 50, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and an air of professional competence that immediately put me at ease. I'd told Ashley that an appraiser was coming to look at some items I might donate to a museum, which wasn't entirely false. I'd learned over the years that the best misdirection contained a grain of truth. Ashley stayed upstairs in the nursery-to-be, probably painting another wall. Karen and I went through the garage first, where she made notes on a tablet, occasionally photographing pieces from multiple angles. "This secretary desk is exceptional," she said, running her hand carefully over the wood. "Late 1890s, I'd estimate. Cherry with original hardware. In this condition, easily $4,000 to $5,000. More if you found the right collector." We moved through the garage methodically, and Karen's estimates mounted. The dining table, $3,000. The china cabinet, $2,200. My grandmother's side tables, $1,800 each. The oriental rug, even with some wear, $6,000. By the time we'd cataloged everything in the garage, we were at $43,000 worth of furniture. "Now let's see what's still in the house," Karen said, and we went inside. Ashley came downstairs as we were examining the remaining pieces in the living room. "What's all this?" she asked, eyeing Karen's professional camera. I kept my voice light. Just getting some valuations done. Karen, this is my daughter-in-law, Ashley. Ashley, Karen Rodriguez. They exchanged polite nods, but I saw Ashley's eyes narrow slightly, saw her trying to figure out what was really happening. Karen moved through the house with practiced efficiency, noting everything, even things I hadn't thought to mention, like the Tiffany-style lamp in the corner and the vintage mirror in the hallway. When Karen finished her assessment at 4:30, we stood in my driveway and she handed me a preliminary report on her tablet. I'll send you the formal appraisal within 48 hours, but here's the summary. The furniture and items currently displaced or at risk total approximately $67,500. The entire household, including what's still in place, is valued at roughly $94,000. I felt my breath catch. I'd known my things had value. They were antiques, family pieces, well-maintained items from a lifetime of careful curation. But seeing it quantified, seeing that number, brought home exactly what Ashley and Marcus had treated so carelessly. Karen must have seen something in my face, because she touched my arm gently. Mrs. Caldwell, I don't know your full situation, but I do know this. These pieces tell a story. They're not just furniture. Anyone who doesn't understand that doesn't deserve to live among them. She handed me her business card. Call me if you need anything else. After Karen left, I sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes, just thinking. The afternoon was fading toward evening, and lights were starting to come on in neighbors' houses up and down Elm Street. I'd lived on this block for 43 years, had watched children grow up and move away, had seen families come and go, had attended block parties and holiday gatherings, and had slowly become one of the street's elder residents. Mrs. Patterson, 3 doors down, was 86 now. The Kowalskis across the street had been here almost as long as me. This was my community, my home, my history, and I was done letting anyone make me feel like a guest in it. I got out of the car and walked inside with my shoulders back and my head high. Marcus's car was in the driveway now. He'd come home while I was talking to Karen. Time for the conversation I'd been planning since yesterday. I found them in the kitchen, Marcus pulling leftovers from the refrigerator while Ashley sat at the small breakfast table I'd bought in 1989, scrolling through her phone. They both looked up when I entered, and something in my expression made Marcus set down the container of pasta he was holding. We need to talk, I said, and pulled out a chair across from Ashley. Marcus remained standing, leaning against the counter, in that way he had of trying to look casual when he was actually nervous. I'd seen him do it since he was 16, and I'd caught him sneaking in past curfew. "What's going on, Mom?" he asked. I placed Karen's business card on the table. "I had an appraiser here today. The furniture you moved to the garage is worth $43,000. Some of those pieces are irreplaceable family antiques." Ashley's face flushed. "We didn't damage anything. We were careful. You stacked cherry wood tables in a damp garage and put paint cans on a 19th century desk," I said, my voice steady but firm. "That's not careful. That's not respectful. And it's not your decision to make." Marcus pushed off from the counter. "Mom, you're being dramatic. We just needed to make room for the baby. You said we could live here and make it our home too." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and wondered when he'd become someone who thought it was okay to rearrange someone else's life without asking. "Marcus, do you remember when you were 12 and you wanted to paint your bedroom black?" He blinked at the change of subject. "Yeah, and you said no." I nodded. "I said no because it was my house, and I got to make decisions about permanent changes. Do you remember what you said?" He shifted his weight. "I said it wasn't fair, because I lived there too." "And do you remember what I told you?" I asked, watching him try to recall a conversation from 22 years ago. He shook his head slowly. "I told you that when you owned your own home, you could paint every room black if you wanted. But in my home, I made the decisions about how space was used and what changes were made. You're 34 now, Marcus. Do you understand the principle any better?" The kitchen was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Ashley's face had gone from flushed to pale. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "This is different. We're family." I pulled the deed from my purse and laid it on the table next to Karen's card. "This is the deed to this house. My name. Not yours, not Ashley's. Mine." I opened my home to you as a favor, and you've repaid that generosity by treating my belongings like garbage." Ashley stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. We're trying to prepare for your grandchild, and you're throwing a fit over furniture." That word, fit, was designed to diminish me, to make me sound like a hysterical old woman having an unreasonable reaction. I recognized the tactic because I'd seen it used against women my age countless times. The implication that caring about your possessions, your boundaries, your home was somehow unseemly or excessive. I stood up too, slowly, using the table for support because my knees were still protesting the earlier work in the garage. "Ashley, I'm 72 years old. I've buried parents, friends, and a husband. I've raised a child, maintained a career for 33 years, and kept this home standing through recessions and storms and every challenge life has thrown at me. I am not throwing a fit. I am setting boundaries that should never have been crossed." Marcus stepped between us, literally putting his body in the space between his mother and his wife, and I saw him make a choice in real time. "Mom, maybe you're right that we should have asked first, but what's done is done. Can we just move forward?" That phrase, "what's done is done," would have worked on me 6 months ago, maybe even 6 weeks ago. The old Margaret, the one who smoothed things over and accommodated and swallowed her frustration for the sake of family peace, would have accepted that non-apology and let them proceed with their plans. But something had shifted in me yesterday when I saw my furniture piled in the garage. Maybe it was the cumulative weight of 18 months of late rent and small disrespects. Maybe it was grief over Robert finally transforming into something else. Something harder and more protective. Whatever it was, I recognized that I'd reached a line I wouldn't cross. "No," I said simply. "We can't just move forward." I picked up the deed and Karen's card and returned them to my purse. "Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, I'm having the locks changed on the garage. My furniture stays exactly where it is until I decide what to do with it. The guest room stops being painted immediately. You'll return it to its original condition. And we're going to draft a formal lease agreement with clear terms about rent, common spaces, and who has authority to make decisions about this house." Ashley laughed, a sharp sound with no humor in it. "You can't be serious. We're about to have a baby in 3 months. I met her eyes. "Then I suggest you start looking for an apartment, because if you can't agree to those terms, you have 30 days to vacate the property." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Marcus's face went white. "Mom, you don't mean that." "I absolutely mean it," I said. And I watched my son realize that his mother, the woman who'd packed his lunches and attended his soccer games and helped him with college applications, had limits he'd finally exceeded. "I spoke with my attorney yesterday. You're tenants at will with no written lease and inconsistent rent payments. I'm well within my rights to terminate your tenancy with proper notice. I'd prefer not to do that, Marcus. I'd prefer to find a way for us all to live here with clear boundaries and mutual respect. But that choice is yours and Ashley's, not mine. I've already made my choice." I walked toward the stairs, then paused and looked back at them. "You have until Friday to decide. That's 3 days. I'll have the lease agreement drawn up by then. You can sign it, or you can start packing. Either way, my furniture comes back inside this weekend." I went upstairs and closed my bedroom door, then sat on my bed and let my hands shake with the adrenaline I'd been suppressing. Standing up to my son like that felt both terrifying and necessary, like lancing a wound that had been festering for months. I heard raised voices downstairs, Ashley's high and angry, Marcus's lower but intense. Part of me wanted to go back down and smooth it over, to take it all back and return to the uneasy peace we'd maintained. But I forced myself to stay put, to let them work through their reaction without my interference. After about 30 minutes, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Then Marcus knocked softly on my door. "Mom, can we talk?" I opened the door. He stood there looking exhausted and younger than his 34 years. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and he entered, closing the door behind him. We stood there in my bedroom, the space that had been my refuge through every difficulty of the past 43 years. "Ashley's really upset," Marcus said, and I waited for him to continue. "She thinks you're trying to control everything, that you don't want us here." I sat down on the edge of my bed and gestured for him to take the chair by the window. "What do you think?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at his hands. I think we messed up. I told Ashley it would be fine to move the furniture, that you wouldn't mind making space for the baby. I didn't think about how it would feel from your perspective. It wasn't a full apology, but it was closer than anything I'd heard so far. Marcus, when your father was dying, do you remember what he said to you? My son's eyes got shiny. He said to take care of you. I nodded. And do you think moving my furniture without asking is taking care of me? Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. No. But Mom, we're drowning here. We can't afford our own place, not with the baby coming and Ashley's student loans and my salary barely covering everything. When you offered to let us move in, it felt like a lifeline. But living here, in your house, with all your rules and your stuff everywhere, sometimes it feels like we're not building our own life, we're just guests in yours. His honesty surprised me. Why didn't you say something before? He laughed bitterly. Because you're doing us a massive favor, and I felt like an ungrateful jerk for wanting more. Ashley's been pushing for months to make the space feel more like ours. Moving the furniture was her idea, but I went along with it because I thought maybe if we just acted like it was our house, it would start to feel that way. I understood then that this wasn't just about furniture. It was about identity and independence, and the complicated dynamics of adult children living with their parents. Marcus, I want to help you, I said carefully. But help doesn't mean erasing my presence in my own home. If you and Ashley need your own space that badly, then maybe the answer isn't trying to reshape this house. Maybe it's finding a place you can actually afford. He looked up sharply. You want us to leave? I shook my head. I want you to make an informed choice. If you stay here, we need clear boundaries and a formal agreement. I'm happy to keep the rent at $400. That's still well below market rate. But you have to pay it on time, you have to ask before making changes, and you have to respect that this is fundamentally my home that I'm sharing with you. If that feels too restrictive, then yes, finding your own place might be better for everyone. Marcus was quiet again, thinking, Can I see the lease agreement before we have to decide? Of course, I said. James is drafting it tonight. I'll have a copy tomorrow. Marcus stood up, then paused. For what it's worth, I am sorry. Ashley and I should have talked to you first. She's scared about the baby and not having enough space, and I think that's making her act more aggressively than she normally would. It was the closest thing to defending his wife while acknowledging the problem that he could probably manage, and I appreciated the effort. Thank you for saying that, I told him. And Marcus? I'm scared too. Not about the baby. I'm excited to be a grandmother, but I'm scared of losing myself in my own home, of becoming invisible because I'm trying so hard to accommodate everyone else. He nodded, looking like he finally understood. I'll talk to Ashley. We'll make a decision by Friday. After he left, I lay back on my bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling wrung out, but also strangely peaceful. The next morning, I woke to the sound of drilling. I glanced at my clock. 7:15, earlier than I usually got up. I pulled on my robe and went to investigate, following the noise to the nursery. Marcus was there with a power drill, removing the curtain rod from the window. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway. We're putting everything back, he said. Ashley's at the store buying paint remover and the original wall color. I must have looked surprised because he gave me a tired smile. We talked until almost 2 in the morning. We're going to sign the lease. We need to be here, at least for the next year or so. But we're going to do it right. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by caution. I'd learned over the past 2 days not to assume things were settled just because someone said the right words. Where's Ashley now? She went to Sherman-Williams on Oak Street when they opened at 7, Marcus said, setting down the drill. She's upset, but she understands. I think she's also embarrassed, though she won't say it. He started removing the painter's tape from the baseboards. We were wrong, Mom. Not just about the furniture, but about a lot of things. We've been treating this like our house that you happen to live in, instead of your house that you're letting us stay in. I stepped into the room and picked up a paint tray to help him clean up. I know it's hard, living with your mother at 34. It probably feels like going backwards. Marcus paused in his work. It does sometimes, but that's not your problem to fix. You opened your home to us, and we took advantage. That ends now. We worked together in comfortable silence for a while, restoring the room to its previous soft blue color. By the time Ashley returned with paint supplies at 8:30, we'd removed all traces of the yellow paint and were touching up the spots where tape had pulled off the original color. Ashley stood in the doorway with shopping bags, her eyes red like she'd been crying. "I'm sorry, Margaret," she said, and her voice was thick. I was completely out of line. "I've been so stressed about the baby and feeling like we don't have our own space, and I took it out on you in the worst possible way." I set down my paintbrush and looked at her. The apology seemed genuine, and I could see the effort it took for her to say it. "Thank you for saying that," I told her. "I know this situation isn't easy for you either." She came into the room and handed Marcus one of the bags. "I got the exact paint match. We should be able to get 2 coats on today, and it'll look like nothing happened." We spent the rest of the morning painting together, the 3 of us, and something shifted in the dynamic. Maybe it was the shared work. Maybe it was the air having been cleared, but it felt less hostile and more like a family figuring things out. By noon, the room was back to its original color, and the furniture situation still needed resolving. I made sandwiches for lunch, and we sat at the kitchen table, the small one, since the dining room table was still in the garage. "I spoke with James this morning," I said. "The lease agreement will be ready this afternoon. I'm picking it up at 3. Marcus nodded. "What are the main terms?" I pulled out the notes James had emailed me. $400 a month, due on the 1st, no exceptions. You're responsible for your own food and personal items. Shared spaces like the living room, kitchen, and dining room remain under my primary control, meaning no moving furniture or making changes without discussion and agreement. You can personalize your bedroom however you want. The nursery can be set up in the smaller guest room, the one that's currently my sewing space. I'll move my things to the basement." Ashley looked up sharply. "We can't take your sewing room." I held up a hand. "Let me finish. You can use that room for the nursery, but my furniture and sewing equipment will be moved, not disposed of. When you eventually move out, the room returns to my use. The lease is for 1 year, with the option to renew if both parties agree. Either party can terminate with 60 days written notice. There's a clause about respectful conduct and household maintenance. And importantly, I retain full ownership and decision-making authority over the property, including any renovations or modifications." I looked at both of them. "Those are the terms. They're fair, but firm. Can you live with them?" Marcus looked at Ashley, who took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, we can live with them. Thank you for letting us stay and for offering the sewing room. We really do appreciate it, even if we haven't shown it well." The lease signing happened that Friday afternoon in my kitchen. James came over with the documents, and we all sat down together to review every clause. Ashley asked questions about the renewal process and what would happen if the baby made more noise than expected. "Babies cry," I said. "I'm not going to penalize you for normal infant behavior. This is about respect and boundaries, not about making you walk on eggshells." James witnessed our signatures, and just like that, we had a formal agreement. After he left, Marcus went out to the garage with his keys. "Let's get your furniture back inside," he said. It took us all afternoon, the 3 of us carefully moving each piece back to its proper place. My back screamed in protest, but I insisted on helping. I needed to see everything restored with my own eyes. The cherry wood side tables returned to the living room. The dining table and chairs went back where they belonged. The oriental rug rolled out across the floor, slightly dusty, but undamaged. By Saturday evening, my house looked like my house again. The guest room was back to its soft blue, and I'd started moving my sewing equipment down to the basement, making room for the nursery in the smaller second bedroom. Ashley spent Sunday measuring the space and making plans, showing me paint swatches and asking my opinion on nursery themes. "What do you think about soft green?" she asked, holding up a sample card. "Not baby green, but more like sage?" I studied the color. "I think it's lovely. Gender neutral, calm. It'll make a beautiful nursery." She smiled tentatively, and I saw that we were building something new here. Not the antagonistic relationship of the past few days, but something more honest and boundaried. That week, I got a call from my sister Linda in Arizona. She'd been checking in regularly since Robert's death, worried about me rattling around in this big house alone. "How are things?" Linda asked, and I could hear her genuine concern. "Better," I said. "Marcus and Ashley are still here, but we've worked things out. We have a lease now, clear boundaries. It's helped a lot." Linda was quiet for a moment. Margaret, I have to tell you, when you called last year and said they were moving in, I worried. Not because I don't love Marcus, but because I've seen too many situations where adult children take advantage of their parents' generosity. She paused. I'm proud of you for setting those boundaries. I know it wasn't easy. I thought about the furniture in the garage, about that moment of decision where I could have just accepted what they'd done. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I realized I'd rather be uncomfortable for a few days than resentful for years. We talked for another hour, catching up on her grandchildren and her garden, and the minutiae of daily life that sisters share. That conversation with Linda reminded me of something Robert used to say, that the hardest thing about parenting adult children was knowing when to help and when to step back. Marcus was 34, old enough to make his own choices and live with the consequences. But he was also my son, and watching him struggle financially while about to become a father himself pulled at every maternal instinct I had. The lease was a compromise. Support with structure, help with boundaries. I could give them a below-market place to live without sacrificing my own peace. As February turned into March, we settled into a new rhythm. Marcus and Ashley painted the smaller guest room a soft sage green and began assembling nursery furniture. I spent my days organizing my basement sewing space and volunteering at the library, trying to rebuild the social life I'd let slide during the months of tension. Mrs. Patterson from down the street noticed the change. You seem happier lately, Mrs. Patterson said when we ran into each other at the grocery store in mid-March. She was 86, sharp as ever, and missed nothing on our block. Things have been better at home, I admitted, loading cereal into my cart. Marcus and his wife are staying with me, and we've worked out a good arrangement. She patted my arm with her thin hand. I saw movers there a few weeks back, wondered what was happening. You know, my daughter wanted me to move in with her last year. I said absolutely not. I love her dearly, but we'd kill each other inside a month. I laughed. How did you make it work? She leaned on her cart. I didn't. I stayed in my house, she stayed in hers, and we visit every Sunday. Sometimes the right answer is space, not proximity. Her words stayed with me as I finished my shopping. The baby arrived on May 18th, 3 weeks early. I got the call from Marcus at 2 a.m. Mom, Ashley's in labor. We're heading to St. Mary's now. I threw on clothes and drove to the hospital, my heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. By 6:30 that morning, I was holding my granddaughter, Emma Grace, for the first time. She was 6 pounds, 4 ounces of perfect tiny human with Ashley's nose and Marcus's dark hair. She's beautiful, I whispered, tears running down my face. Ashley, exhausted but glowing, smiled from the hospital bed. We were hoping you'd be okay with the middle name. Grace was your mother's name, right? I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. My mother had passed in 2011, and I'd missed her every day since. Having her name carried forward through my granddaughter felt like a gift I didn't expect. She would have loved that, I finally managed to say. Bringing Emma home 5 days later transformed the house in ways I couldn't have predicted. The crying that Ashley had worried about became just another sound in our daily rhythm, usually soothed quickly by feeding or changing. The nursery that had caused so much conflict now felt like the most important room in the house. I found myself tiptoeing past it when Emma napped, found myself offering to hold her so Ashley could shower or sleep, found myself more involved in their daily life than I'd been in months. But the boundaries held. When Emma was fussy at 2 a.m, I stayed in my room unless asked for help. When Ashley's mother visited for a week, I made myself scarce, giving them space for family bonding. When Marcus and Ashley needed to discuss pediatrician choices or sleep schedules, I offered opinions only when asked. The lease had changed more than our living arrangement. It had changed how we related to each other. In June, something unexpected happened. Marcus came home from work one evening with news that his firm was offering him a promotion. It's a significant raise, he said over dinner, bouncing Emma gently in one arm while trying to eat with the other. 43% more than I'm making now. Ashley's eyes lit up. Marcus, that's wonderful. Does this mean we can finally... She stopped, glancing at me. I knew what she'd been about to say. Does this mean we can finally move out? I kept my face neutral. That's excellent news, honey. You've worked hard for this. Marcus looked between us. The thing is, the new position requires some travel. Nothing excessive, but probably 1 week a month. I'll need to be in the Boston office for training starting in September. Ashley's excitement dimmed a little. A week a month? With Emma so young? I saw the opportunity and made a decision. You know, if you wanted to stay here a bit longer, until Emma's older and the travel schedule settles down, that would be fine with me. Ashley looked surprised. Really? I thought you might want your space back now that... She trailed off, but I understood. Now that the crisis that had brought us together was resolved, now that they could afford to leave. I like having Emma here, I said honestly. And practically speaking, having me around to help when Marcus travels might make things easier for you, Ashley. But it's entirely your choice. The lease renewal is coming up next month, and we can decide then. They talked about it over the next few weeks. I heard them discussing finances, weighing the cost of rent versus daycare, considering how long they wanted to stay. In mid-July, they asked to renew the lease for another year. But we'd like to increase the rent, Marcus said. $600 a month. It's still below market, but it's closer to fair. I started to argue, but Ashley interrupted. Margaret, you're going to be providing childcare sometimes when Marcus travels. That's worth something. Let us pay our way. We renewed the lease at $600 a month, and I felt the relationship shift again, this time towards something that felt almost like a chosen partnership rather than an obligation. When Marcus traveled to Boston in September for his training, I helped Ashley with Emma's nighttime routine, showed her some tricks I'd learned when Marcus was a baby, sat with her during the difficult 3 a.m. feedings when exhaustion made everything seem impossible. I don't know how you did this alone, Ashley said one night, rocking Emma while I made her a cup of tea. Robert traveled for work too when Marcus was little, gone for weeks sometimes. It was brutal. She looked at me with new respect. I never thought about that. You were just always so capable, so put together. I assumed it all came easily to you. I laughed softly. Nothing worth doing comes easily. You just keep going because you have to. By the time October rolled around, a full 8 months after that awful day when I came home to find my furniture in the garage, we'd found a sustainable rhythm. Marcus's promotion was going well. Emma was sleeping for 4-hour stretches at night. Ashley had joined a mother's group and was building her own support network. And I'd reclaimed my sewing hobby, spending evenings in my basement workspace making quilts, including a special one for Emma with squares that represented family history, fabric from Robert's favorite shirt, a piece of my wedding dress, material from the curtains that had hung in Marcus's childhood room. The quilt became something of a legend in the house. Ashley would bring friends over to see it, explaining the significance of each square, and I heard the pride in her voice when she talked about her mother-in-law who could create something so meaningful. The furniture that had been the source of our crisis now served its intended purpose, looking beautiful and functional in rooms where 3 generations lived together with boundaries intact. One evening in late October, almost exactly 9 months after the furniture incident, I was sitting in my living room, in my grandmother's chair that had been returned from the garage, reading a book while Ashley fed Emma on the couch nearby. Margaret, can I ask you something? Ashley said, and something in her tone made me look up. Of course. She adjusted Emma's position, then met my eyes. When we moved your furniture without asking, why didn't you just kick us out immediately? Most people would have. I think my mother would have. I considered the question. Honestly, I came close. But your family, and you were about to have a baby. I couldn't do that without at least trying to find another way. Ashley nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that day a lot lately, about how entitled I felt, how I genuinely thought we had the right to change things because we lived here too. I was so wrong. You weren't entirely wrong, I said, surprising both of us. You did live here. You were preparing for a baby. Those needs were real. What was wrong was the method, doing it without discussion, without consideration for my feelings or my property. If you'd come to me and said, Margaret, we need to set up a nursery and we're feeling cramped. Can we talk about solutions? We could have figured something out together. Ashley's eyes filled with tears. I was scared you'd say no, that you'd tell us we had to make do, or worse, that we had to leave. So I just acted, thinking it was easier to ask forgiveness than permission. She wiped her eyes with her free hand. That was cowardly of me. I'm sorry, again. I set down my book and moved to sit next to her on the couch. Ashley, do you know what I've learned? The hard boundaries I set, the lease, all of it. It actually made it possible for us to live together successfully. Without those boundaries, I would have been resentful, and you would have been anxious, and eventually it would have exploded in a much worse way. Emma made a small noise and Ashley switched her to the other side. I told my mother about what happened, not right away but last month. I expected her to be on my side, to say you were being unreasonable. But she said almost exactly what you just said, that boundaries are how relationships survive proximity. I smiled. Your mother sounds wise. Ashley laughed. She is, even when I don't want to admit it. She also said something else. She said that sometimes the best gift a parent can give an adult child is the chance to succeed or fail on their own terms. By setting boundaries and making us step up, you gave us that chance. We sat together in comfortable silence for a while, Emma feeding contentedly, the house settling into evening stillness around us. I thought about how close we'd come to destroying this chance at living together, how one decision, my decision to set clear boundaries instead of either exploding or accommodating, had changed everything. Marcus came home from work a few minutes later, kissing Ashley and then Emma, and then giving me a quick hug. How was your day? He asked me. And I realized he'd been asking me that every day for months now, actually listening to the answer. Good, I said. I finished Emma's quilt. Want to see? We went down to my basement workshop, and I showed him the completed quilt, all 42 squares telling the story of 3 generations. He traced his fingers over the square made from Robert's shirt. Dad would have loved this, he said quietly. He would have loved all of this, being a grandfather, having Emma here in this house. I felt the familiar pang of grief. He would have. I think about that a lot. How he'd be on the floor playing with her, making funny faces, completely wrapped around her tiny fingers. Marcus smiled. He'd also have given me hell about the furniture thing. I laughed. Oh, absolutely. You got off easy with me, frankly. The rest of that year passed in a blur of holidays and milestones. Emma's first Thanksgiving, where we somehow fit 10 people around the dining room table that had been in the garage 9 months earlier. Christmas morning with wrapping paper covering the oriental rug, and Emma bewildered by all the attention. Ashley's parents visiting for New Year's and being impressed by how well our multi-generational household functioned. By the time spring arrived again, marking a full year since Emma's birth, and almost 15 months since the furniture crisis, I couldn't imagine the house without them. But I also knew that wouldn't last forever. Marcus and Ashley were rebuilding their savings. They talked more frequently about eventually buying their own place, about giving Emma a yard to play in, about building equity. The difference now was that these conversations included me, asked my opinion, considered my feelings. I was part of their planning instead of an obstacle to plan around. In April, they asked if I'd be willing to extend the lease month to month instead of committing to another full year. We're house hunting, Marcus explained. Nothing urgent, but we want the flexibility to move when we find the right place. I agreed immediately, and I meant it. The lease had served its purpose. It had established respect and boundaries and transformed our relationship. Now we could move forward with trust instead of rules. Over the following months, they looked at houses. I babysat Emma during showings, offered opinions when asked, kept my concerns to myself when they fell in love with places that seemed overpriced or impractical. They were adults making their own decisions, and my role was support, not control. In July, they found a house they loved, a 3-bedroom craftsman-style home 15 minutes away, with a backyard and good schools and everything young families dream about. They made an offer. It was accepted. The closing was scheduled for September 15th, almost 20 months after they'd moved in with me, and 19 months after the day I found my furniture in the garage. As the date approached, I felt an unexpected sadness. Yes, I'd have my house fully to myself again. Yes, I'd be able to use both guest rooms and spread out and make every decision without consultation. But I'd also miss Emma's morning babbling, miss Marcus's daily check-ins, even miss Ashley's mother group friends coming over for play dates. The house would be quieter, emptier. On September 10th, 5 days before their move, Marcus knocked on my bedroom door after Emma was asleep. Can we talk? We went downstairs to the living room, and he sat in my grandfather's chair, the one that had started everything. Mom, Ashley and I have been talking. When we move out, we want to keep paying you rent for 3 more months. I started to protest, but he held up his hand. Let me explain. You gave us an incredible gift by letting us live here. You helped us save money, gave Ashley support she desperately needed as a new mother, provided stability during a really difficult time. 3 months of rent doesn't come close to repaying that, but it's something. Please let us do it. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. Marcus, you don't need to... He leaned forward. Mom, I do. We do. When I think about how we treated you that day, moving your furniture, acting like we owned the place, I'm still ashamed. You could have thrown us out and you would have been completely justified. Instead, you set boundaries and gave us a chance to do better. You taught me something about grace and firmness that I'm going to use with Emma someday. Let us say thank you properly. I wiped my eyes and nodded. Okay, thank you. We sat quietly for a moment, and then Marcus said something that surprised me. You know what Dad told me before he died? Besides taking care of you, I mean. I shook my head. He said that the measure of a life well lived isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away and how you treat people when it costs you something. He said you'd been showing him that for 38 years. September 15th arrived with perfect fall weather, sunny and crisp. A moving truck arrived at 9 a.m., and by noon, Marcus and Ashley's belongings were loaded and on their way to their new house. I helped Ashley do a final walkthrough, checking for forgotten items in closets and drawers. Emma sat on my hip, watching the empty rooms with wide eyes like she knew something significant was happening. It's weird, Ashley said, standing in the nursery that would soon return to being my sewing room. This place was never really ours, but it was home. Does that make sense? I adjusted Emma on my hip, feeling her solid weight, smelling her baby shampoo. Perfect sense. Home isn't always about ownership. Sometimes it's about belonging, even temporarily. Ashley hugged me then, fierce and sudden. Thank you for everything, Margaret. For putting up with us. For teaching us. For loving Emma so completely. You saved us, you know. We would have drowned without you. The house felt cavernous that first night after they left. I walked through rooms that echoed with my footsteps, sat at the dining room table, the same one that had been in the garage, and ate dinner alone. But it wasn't the devastating loneliness I'd feared. Instead, it felt like taking a deep breath after holding it for a long time. I had my space back. My furniture sat where it belonged, every piece with its story intact. The house was mine again, fully, with no negotiations or compromises needed. But I also had Marcus and Ashley 15 minutes away, close enough to visit regularly, far enough to have their own life. I had Emma, who I'd see multiple times a week. I had a relationship with my son and daughter-in-law that was stronger for having survived conflict and emerged with mutual respect. That night, I wrote in the journal I'd kept sporadically since Robert's death. I wrote about the furniture, about boundaries, about the day I came home to chaos and made a choice to stand firm. I wrote, "Today they moved out, and I realized something. The furniture was never the real issue. It was about respect, about being seen, about refusing to disappear just because I'm older and alone. I'm 73 now, and I finally understand that grace and boundaries aren't opposites. They're partners. You can love people fiercely and still require them to treat you well. Maybe that's the most important thing I've learned." Over the following weeks, we settled into new patterns. Marcus brought Emma over twice a week while Ashley worked her part-time job. I had them over for Sunday dinners. Ashley texted me questions about Emma's development and shared funny stories from her mother's group. We'd found a balance that worked, one where I was involved but not enmeshed, helpful but not taken for granted. In October, on a day much like the one almost 2 years earlier when I'd found my furniture in the garage, I was sitting in my living room with coffee and a book when my phone buzzed. A text from Ashley. "Emergency. Can you take Emma for a few hours? Marcus's car broke down and I have a work thing." I texted back immediately. "Of course, bring her over." 20 minutes later, Ashley arrived with Emma and a diaper bag, rushed and apologetic. "I'm so sorry for the short notice. We're completely scrambling today." I took Emma and waved Ashley off. "Go, we'll be fine." After Ashley left, I sat in my grandmother's chair with Emma on my lap. her solid 15-month-old body warm against my chest. She played with my necklace, babbling in her half-language, completely content. I looked around my living room, at the furniture that had caused such conflict, and felt overwhelmingly grateful. Not just that the furniture was back where it belonged, but that the crisis it represented had forced necessary conversations, required hard boundaries, and ultimately strengthened relationships that might otherwise have remained superficial or resentful. Emma grabbed my face with both hands and laughed, and I kissed her forehead. "Your daddy and mama moved all this furniture once," I told her, knowing she couldn't possibly understand. "And Grandma had to teach them a very important lesson about respect and boundaries. Someday, when you're older, I'll tell you the whole story. For now, just know that standing up for yourself, even with people you love, especially with people you love, is one of the most important things you can do." My phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus. "Mom, thank you so much for taking Emma. Ashley told me you didn't hesitate. You're the best." I smiled and typed back, "Always happy to help. Take your time." And I meant it. The difference was that now, helping felt like a choice I was making, not an expectation I was fulfilling. The boundaries we'd established almost 2 years ago meant that when I said yes, it was genuine and freely given, with no resentment simmering underneath. I spent the afternoon with Emma, feeding her lunch, reading her books, watching her toddle around my living room, touching furniture that had been part of my life longer than her father had been alive. Each piece told a story, and someday she'd be part of those stories too. The cherry wood tables would hold her homework papers and art projects when she visited. The oriental rug would cushion her falls as she learned to run. The dining table would host her birthday parties and holiday meals. That evening, after Marcus picked up Emma and thanked me again, I sat on my front porch watching the neighborhood settle into dinner routines. Lights came on in houses up and down the street. Mrs. Patterson waved from her porch 3 doors down. The Kowalskis' teenage son practiced basketball in their driveway. Everything looked the same as it had 2 years ago, but I felt completely different. I'd been tested in ways I never expected, forced to choose between keeping peace and keeping my sense of self, and I'd chosen myself. Not in a selfish way, but in the way that preserves your dignity and establishes that you matter. Robert had told Marcus to take care of me, but what I'd learned was that taking care of myself had to come first. Only from that foundation could I be genuinely generous, truly helpful, actually present for the people I loved. The furniture had taught me that. Those pieces that represented generations of my family, decades of my life, had become the unlikely teachers of my most important lesson. A month later, in November, Marcus and Ashley invited me to Emma's first birthday party at their new house. I arrived with the quilt I'd made, finely finished and wrapped in tissue paper. Their house was full of people: Ashley's family, some of Marcus's friends from work, neighbors they'd already met. Emma wore a tiny party hat and seemed bewildered by the attention and the cake. Marcus pulled me aside while Ashley was cutting the cake into tiny pieces. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." His serious tone worried me. "What's wrong?" He shook his head. "Nothing's wrong, the opposite, actually. Ashley's pregnant again." My face must have shown my surprise because he laughed. "We know, it's fast. Emma will be barely 20 months when the new baby comes. But we're happy, and we wanted you to know first." I hugged him hard. "That's wonderful news, terrifying, but wonderful." He pulled back and looked at me seriously. "We're going to need help, Mom. More babysitting, probably more advice. But we want to do it right this time. We'll respect your time and your boundaries." We learned that lesson. The party continued around us, Emma smashing cake into her face while relatives laughed and took photos. I helped Ashley clean up afterward, washing dishes while she packed up leftovers. "Marcus told you our news?" she asked, and I nodded. "Congratulations. Are you excited or terrified?" She laughed. "Both? Emma still doesn't sleep through the night consistently and will have a newborn. It's going to be chaos." She dried a serving platter and set it on the counter. "But we can do this, I think. We have our own space, Marcus's job is stable, and we have you nearby if we need help." She looked at me. "If you're willing to help, I mean. I know we've already asked a lot of you." I thought about the next few years, about 2 grandchildren, about babysitting and birthday parties, and probably more moments where boundaries would need discussion. "I'm willing to help," I said. "As long as we keep talking, keep being honest, keep respecting each other's limits, I'm all in." I drove home that night thinking about how much had changed since that day I found my furniture in the garage. I'd gone from feeling invisible and disrespected in my own home to feeling valued and included in my family's life. The difference was boundaries, clear, firm, loving boundaries that let everyone know where they stood. As I pulled into my driveway and looked at my house lit up against the November darkness, I felt proud of what I'd done, of the line I'd drawn and the grace I'd shown afterward. The furniture was safely inside, restored to its proper place. But more importantly, I was restored to my proper place, not as a doormat or a source of endless accommodation, but as a woman with dignity, boundaries, and the self-respect to enforce them. Robert would have been proud. I was proud. And that, I thought as I unlocked my front door and stepped into my own space, was the real victory.